Hello and welcome to Off the Books, where we surf the uncharted waters of accounting, finance, risk, and wherever else the waves take us. This episode is brought to you by Workiva, the one platform that unites the financial reporting, ESG audit, and risk teams who all need to approve your request for a fall football happy hour. My name is Steve Soder, accounting enthusiast and Diet Coke aficionado. I'm looking forward to debating a great conversation, and I'm so happy to have you with us. I am also, as always, very happy to have Catherine Tsai joining us. Catherine, please tell everyone about yourself.
Golly, I'm not an accountant or Diet Coke aficionado, but I like venti soy chais and asking questions, and I'm excited to turn up the heat on today's topic. It's making me sweat already, the SEC's proposed climate disclosure rule.
Yeah, that's right. So earlier this year, the SEC Pro Group met down in San Antonio to discuss the SEC's climate proposal, among other things. And we had guest speaker Emily Pierce, Associate General Counsel and VP of Global Regulatory Climate Disclosure at Persefoni.
Okay, what is Persefoni all about?
You know what? That's a terrific question. So Persefoni is a Workiva partner and carbon accounting software platform whose mission is really to enable and support companies in managing the data related to greenhouse gas emissions. So imagine, for example, trying to close the books without an accounting system like a general ledger or an ERP. Well, new disclosure rules, such as the one proposed by the SEC, are going to require climate reporting that's similar to financial reporting, and Persefoni provides a system to capture and manage that data. Before Persefoni, I'd add, Emily actually worked at the SEC for over a decade doing some very important and interesting work, so she had a really unique perspective on all of this.
And at the SEC Pro Group meeting, I thought she had a really great way to frame why climate is entering SEC filings, which a lot of hardcore financial reporting folks might be wondering.
Yeah, that's right. As we discussed actually on a recent episode with our producer Mike Gravano and Mark Mellon, the SEC's mission is to protect investors and consistent, comparable disclosures that meet the demands and the needs of those investors are a big part of providing that protection. So with that, let's take a listen to what Emily had to say.
That is where climate comes in. Over time, environmental issues became clearer that they were having impact on businesses' performance, and the SEC rules evolved to capture those. So as you all are, I'm sure, aware, the Reg SK section of the 10K has grown over the decades. And as new topics become important to the broader market, the SEC often steps in and provides frameworks for disclosures around those topics. With climate, this is not a new obligation. In 2010, the SEC issued guidance about climate-related disclosures, emphasizing that this was for many companies likely a material risk and providing a framework for thinking about the kinds of disclosures that might be relevant. And since 2010, the marketplace of information and the market demand for climate-related information exploded. In 2015, from a global perspective, you had the Financial Stability Board convened a market-driven, industry-driven task force called the TCFD, the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, which developed recommendations for a framework about how to think about climate-related financial issues and how to convey that information to investors. So that work by the market for the market had a lot of uptake. A lot of companies started using the TCFD around the globe. A lot of investors saw the TCFD and asked for that information. And so within a very short period of time, you had a situation where it was very clear investors wanted the information, saw the TCFD as a useful framework, and that companies were providing that, saw value in providing that, and also found the TCFD to be a useful framework. But there are also a lot of other demands in the market. ESG raters, investors would have their own surveys. And so where I think we were in 2021, when the SEC began to look seriously at developing a climate proposal and issued a request for feedback on whether or not it should and what the kinds of things it should consider, was we had a place where the marketplace for information was both insufficient for investors. They just weren't getting everything they needed in a consistent, comparable, and reliable way across the marketplace. And it was also really inefficient for issuers. So we've had both investors weren't being fully protected and the markets weren't fully efficient. So that is, I think, the rationale behind the SEC's proposal, which again, it's not SEC climate rule, it is an SEC proposal to enhance and standardize climate-related financial disclosures. And I think that's a really important framing to think about what is being asked in the SEC's proposal.
That last bit there, I think, is really helpful for providing guardrails around what you would need to disclose if you're a public company.
Yeah, I think it is, Catherine, and I think it definitely puts it into the right framework and perspective. I know a lot of the argument against the SEC's proposal, or people thinking that, hey, why is the SEC regulating climate? And the SEC is not regulating climate. I mean, don't get me wrong. I certainly have some concerns from a financial reporting perspective about some element of the proposal. But to me, when you talk about that argument of why is the SEC regulating climate, it's a little bit like saying, why is the SEC regulating cash or profitability or some other metric? I think that the point here is that investors are looking for this information. The SEC wants to provide the protection. I certainly think and would agree that probably plays to some of the initiatives that are, currently being pushed. I think by, certain factions of the government, but you really need to put that on the side and actually look at the empirical evidence that just shows that people really are looking for this. And I think she summed it up really, really well.
Yep. I know everyone's on the edge of their seat waiting for the final rule to come out. Did Emily have anything to say about that?
Well, everybody is waiting on the edge of their seat, and she did have something to say about it, although I'm not sure everybody's going to be satisfied. Let's take a listen to what she had to say.
The first thing I like to say is that the April date that got picked up in the media was based on the fact that when the SEC puts out its regulatory flexibility agenda, sort of all the issues on the agenda are either the first half of the year or the second half of the year. So when people talk about a delay, we're not at the end of June yet. So, but I do think that the reality is that the SEC staff is wrestling with several issues. Over 15,000 comments. The SEC staff is a highly professional, committed team that are committed to the APA process and really going through all that feedback and giving it due consideration. There are a lot of issues where I think the SEC, the staff is developing a recommendation and really thinking through what it will ultimately recommend to the commission. And then, of course, the commission is 5 members. So in order to finalize the rule, you need 3 votes. So there's also a process of building consensus. You also have, a continually evolving marketplace, both in terms of what's happening globally in regulation, what's happening politically in our country, what's happening in terms of legal developments. I think there's a lot of things going on that are impacting the timing. I would predict that it will be out by the end of the year. Chair Gensler has an agenda and wants to meet those goals. But in terms of timing between now and then, I don't. My guess is as good as yours.
Okay, Steve. So before Halloween or after Halloween?
You know what? If I had to guess, I would probably say after Halloween. One of the things that Emily did bring up outside of that part that we just listened to is that the right way to think about the SEC's agenda, which was new to me, is that, when they look at, let's say, an April release versus an October release, what they're really talking about is first half of the year versus second half of the year. I would assume that it's still going to be quite a bit of work on the SEC's part to get this done before the end of the year. Therefore, I'd say that this probably comes out, I'd say, post-Halloween. I don't know. What do you think, Catherine?
Well, since you said post, I guess I'll say before.
All right.
50-50 chance, right?
We'll have to make a wager on that. I do think important, and as you heard, we were listening to this, late spring, early summer is when this discussion actually took place. But several important things have happened since then. In the EU, they have adopted the ESRS, those 12 standards that are going to go along with the CSRD. That's important because I think that the SEC wanted to see what that looks like, just to be sure that there weren't major inconsistencies. I think the bigger thing, though, is that the ISSB has adopted their 2 standards, which I think have a lot of consistencies with the SEC. Now, the ISSB is ultimately going to be more than just climate disclosure, but I think those were 2 important things that needed to happen before the SEC could finalize their rule. So now that that's done, I think there's probably, or at least I would assume, there's a clear path perhaps to the SEC actually moving forward and adopting a rule.
We will be waiting. Let's take a quick commercial break, and when we come back, we'll hear what challenges Emily sees for companies in light of their proposal.
Today's episode is brought to you by Workiva. Like most of us, I like to pretend to eat healthy, or at least not exclusively eat Dino Chicken Nuggies. And that's why I'm a big fan of salad kits. Yes, this is an ad for Workiva, but it is also an ad for salad kits. No longer will I buy a bunch of kale or arugula and sadly watch it turn to green smelly soup in the bottom drawer of my fridge after making a salad for one. No longer will I have to think of crouton pairings, and no longer will I have 14 half-used bottles of dressing in the fridge, even though I know I only like balsamic vinaigrette. I have found culinary convenience in salad kits, with the wonderfully paired dried cranberries, carrot strips, goat cheese, and strawberry vinaigrette. You will find financial reporting, ESG, and audit risk convenience in Workiva. Yes, Workiva. And you've got your SEC reporting, ESG reports, 10K, sustainability reports, SOX compliance, risk assessments, and so much more, dear listener, on the same platform. You've got just the right ingredients, right when and where you need them. Toss out that old technology your team never liked to use and try Workiva. Tailor-made to your processes, without all the extraneous junk that just gums up the works. Plus, it's fat-free and low in sodium.
We are back listening to comments from Emily Pierce of Persefoni, formerly of the SEC, on the SEC's proposed climate disclosure rule.
Yeah, I think the first challenge is just identifying who knows what and who does what and who has what expertise across your company that's relevant to these issues. So really bringing together cross-functional teams to talk through how climate is impacting different elements of the business, where climate-related issues like severe weather impacts, like transition risks, like rising fuel costs, are impacting the financial statements. I think there are a lot of line items where certain changes in performance or changes in those numbers could be attributable to climate. And so really thinking through from a cross-functional perspective what those are, starting to across your business, integrating some of those issues into your enterprise risk discussions, establishing governance processes around these issues if you don't have them, or integrating them into existing governance processes. That's really the starting point. And then that sets up your discussion about your strategy and your responses. And then I think, the next challenge is really pulling together the data that you need to support these disclosures. So we talked a little bit about the financial statement footnote, that will have its own challenges depending on how that is finalized. But on the GHG emissions data, a lot of companies do have GHG emissions data, a lot of Scope 2, which is indirect emissions based on energy use, comes from utility bills. So facilities teams have a lot of this information. We're here here at Newstar, a lot of companies have robust Scope 1 emissions information in their company that they're reporting to other agencies, but that would be relevant for your emissions reporting under the SEC's rule. And then Scope 3, which is your indirect emissions within your value chain. A lot of that information also resides around the company. And for companies that have sustainability teams or have been reporting on a voluntary basis, been reporting on the TCFD, a lot of this resides within sustainability departments. And so again, bringing together just identifying what you have, where it is, and what needs to be enhanced to prepare it for regulatory reporting, rather than voluntary reporting.
So the question that I had asked Emily going into that was summarizing here is, hey, how do you start? What does this look like? You're talking about bringing together a lot of different data and actually doing that in ways that perhaps you hadn't had to do in the past, at least for non-financial data. To me, I thought it was really interesting as she kind of laid out, at least, describing what the basics were. And I think, Catherine, the challenge is going to be, how do you take existing disclosure processes and existing conversations and work streams and collaborating with those various teams to start identifying exactly, like she said, what data do you have? What data do you need? Once you have identified what that is, what process does that need to go through, in order to meet the disclosure requirements? I mean, Catherine, I know that you have been watching this for a very long time, certainly as long as I have. What did you take out of what Emily shared?
It sounds like a very complicated process where you would probably want some sort of technology or like maybe 20 more people on your team to help you with these disclosures.
Well, and assuming that you probably don't have available headcount for 20 more people, I think a lot of companies are looking to technology. Because I think when you talk about integrating processes, I think inherently you're really talking about some deployment of technology. And so one of the questions that we asked Emily was exactly that. Hey, how is technology going to play into this? Is that going to be the solution? And how are companies thinking about it? So yeah, with that, let's take a listen to see what she had to say.
Yeah, so focusing on carbon accounting, it very much is an exercise that lends itself to ledgers. There are carbon transactions, there are utility bills from specific facilities for specific date ranges that translate into an emissions number when you apply a certain emissions factor. There's different approaches you can use to calculate that, market-based versus location-based. All those are driven by different data inputs. So we are talking about a very massive data exercise, and technology is suited to manage data. I think within this process, there's sort of understanding where your data sits, there's gathering it, there's a process of inputting it, there's a process of determining, what scope you're placing that particular carbon transaction, what emissions factor you want to apply, which of the various estimation approaches you're using, and being able to really document each of those decisions along the way to roll up into a Scope 1 number, Scope 2 number, and a Scope 3 number within your Scope 3, some of the specific categories, is all going to be facilitated by technology. So I think, technology is evolving quickly to meet that need. My company is one of the companies that has developed a platform that is very focused on meeting the needs of auditors, sort of being assurance ready. Bringing that extra degree of reliability. And again, it's that idea of an ERP type system is going to be really important. And I think this is important just systemically, that we really have to bring technology to this space to make it scalable. And this is where I'll put on my international hat for a minute. I think in order to really get information across borders, which is where many of our supply chain providers reside, and get information out in a way that's fair and transparent to the global markets, so that investors around the globe, can think through what the risks are in terms of where they invest, and bring capital to broader sources. Technology is really the way companies are going to be able to communicate this information to each other. And I'll just close with Scope 3 in particular. This is sharing information across systems, right? You're going to be seeking, in some cases, primary data from core Tier 1 suppliers. And again, having systems to control that information exchange and have it fit neatly in your new system all just brings efficiencies to the process that technology enables.
I think, Catherine, just listening to her repeat that again, I really love the fact that she brought up audit. That's the one thing that we haven't talked a lot about in this discussion, but as a reminder, anything that you're going to put in an SEC filing would certainly be subject to at least review by your auditors, but, often that's going to be subject to some kind of assurance. And that, to me, I think becomes one of the really important roles that technology is going to play. If you're doing all this work manually, it is so hard to be able to get all that work done at the same time as you are supporting that audit exercise, which is so critically important. And I think that by the time that you're able to deploy technology, by the time you're able to get everything together, that's really when you've achieved this kind of like nirvana state of, hey, we've coordinated and integrated the data, we've unified the teams, we've got the transparency that we need as a team, but we can also facilitate auditors with all the transparency and visibility that they need, so they're almost able to do their work behind the scenes. I mean, again, I realize this is like somewhat self-interested for a technology company, but I think it is readily apparent and it is very obvious that technology is really the only way that you're going to be able to solve these problems.
Especially Scope 3.
Well, yeah, absolutely.
Those emissions from your value chain, those are all outside your company, so it'd be hard to gather all that information manually, I would think.
Well, and I think to the extent that you're going to have to use, let's say, estimates or some kind of models or whatever it is, like not being able to actually pull the specific data, but to be able to create educated assumptions of what that looks like, you're going to need to do that in a place where auditors and others can actually see your work, see the assumptions that you made. How is that calculated? I mean, again, it's not like you're going to be doing that on college ruled notebooks, right? You're going to need a place to be able to have that documented. And again, I just don't know how else you do that without the use of technology.
So when Emily Pierce was speaking to the SEC Pro Group, was there a chance to sneak in a closing question of the day?
There really wasn't a chance to sneak in a closing question of the day. I think I snuck in a couple of questions for her when we all shared that minivan Uber ride back to the airport. But as it happens, I'm not sure I actually remember what that question was. So I don't know.
Gosh.
Catherine, do you have a closing question you wanted to ask?
I have a closing question that I could ask you.
Okay.
So in the spirit of us all waiting with bated breath for the SEC climate proposal to become a final rule, What is something as a kid you were excitedly waiting for, and did it end up living up to your expectation?
Okay, well, I've got two answers. First was when I was not a kid, but this is a shameless plug for the SEC Pro Group. I actually loved the quarterly meetings. So this meeting that we had, it was hosted in San Antonio. We had a big turnout, beautiful facility at New Star Energy, who was kind enough to host us there. I looked forward to those discussions every single quarter, like a kid in a candy store, sort of, or a Steve in a Diet Coke store. Again, if you're not a member of the pro groups, I would highly recommend you consider it, especially if you're an ESG, an audit and risk, or a financial reporting practitioner. But as a kid, I was fascinated with getting mail, as I think most kids were. I was fascinated even getting my parents' mail. Now, it was always like the best if it was coming to me, but, as an 8-year-old kid, I often didn't have much coming to me except maybe like a Boys Life magazine. I think I subscribed to Boys Life and Nintendo Power, if I remember correctly. Those are monthly publications, so most days of the month I was left disappointed. But I was super excited to get those and go up to my room and start thumbing through the pages.
That's
How
a
about
great
you,
answer.
Catherine?
Oh, I like to read a lot. And as a kid, I like to read a lot. And so I think trying to find out that Encyclopedia Brown, how those books would end, that was a surprise that I was eagerly awaiting.
Nice. Very nice. Well, Catherine, it's been a terrific discussion. Again, thanks to Emily Pierce for joining the pro groups, and thanks to you, dear listener, for surfing along with us. I'm Steve Soder. That was Catherine Tsai. This has been Off the Books presented by Workiva. Please subscribe, leave a review, and darn it, tell your buddies if you like the show. Now, if you're watching this on YouTube, leave us a note in the comments, or feel free to drop us a line at offthebooks@workiva.com. We would love to hear from you. Surf's up, and we'll see you on the next wave.